I'm glad to be able to join you again for another lesson from God's Word after being gone for a week or two. We certainly appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us and listen to this broadcast. You know, we make choices every day of our lives, and most of these choices are very insignificant and they have little influence over the rest of our lives. Of course, other choices are more important. Sometimes their influence may last for years. But there is one choice that is most significant, and that is whether to serve God or not. The consequences of that choice will last for all eternity. And that's the choice we're going to be looking at today for just a few moments. You know, several times in Scripture, God encourages men to choose to serve Him. For example, Moses, near the end of his life, placed a choice before the people of Israel. He said, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. Notice there, Moses pointed out to the people that there was a choice that they needed to make. And that difference between the two choices was life and death. Obviously, you cannot get any more difference than that. Now, no one would choose death, I don't think. But it seems that the people of Israel never really made a choice because they continued to try to serve both God and idols. Well, near the end of his life, Joshua made a similar choice before the people. He made one final effort to persuade them to resolve to follow God. And he said at the end of Joshua, he said, and it seems evil to you to serve the Lord. Choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your father served that was on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Once again, we see that Joshua encouraged the people of Israel to make a choice. But he said he's already made his choice. And he says as far as he is concerned, he and his house was going to serve the Lord. And he encouraged the people of Israel, of course, to make a similar choice. We know the New Testament places a similar choice before us. We have before us life and death, a blessing or a curse. Now, of course, as we said before, we would think that no one would actually choose death. And yet multitudes are doing that very thing today. Now, why is it they're doing that? Well, there's probably a multitude of reasons, but I think one big reason is that many do not really make a choice. In other words, they go through life just doing what they want to do, and they don't really commit their life to God and serve Him. They often will think they will do it later. And I'm sure I've heard people, and I'm sure you have too, say that one day I will serve the Lord. One day I will be baptized. One day I will commit to God. But it's later. And too often, more often than not, that they never really make the choice. You see, oftentimes that day never comes. When we keep putting it off and say, one day in the future I will obey, well, oftentimes that day never comes. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 2, in an accepted time I have heard you, and in the day of salvation I have helped you. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Paul encourages us to make the correct choice today. You see, God will not accept second place. Notice there's also a time element to this choice. Joshua said to choose this day. Now is the day of salvation. In other words, Paul is saying we need to make a choice, and you need to do it now. Well, of course, that same exhortation is still just as valid today as it was when Paul wrote it many, many years ago. The choice between us of whether to serve God or serve Satan is not always going to be open. You see, time may close this door of choice. we may die before we make the choice. Young people often think they have plenty of time to make the choice because they are young. However, we know that is not a reliable indicator of the time of death because young people die every day. But even if you are fortunate to live many years, your heart may become too hardened by sin to make the choice. This is what the writer of Hebrews pointed out to us in Hebrews 3 and verse 13. He said, "But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." Yes, sin is deceitful, and it tends to harden our hearts. And so, in other words, if you refuse to obey God, if you put the decision off, then eventually your heart will become so hardened that the chances of your making the choice is basically non-existent. Again, we see that time closes the door of the opportunity of choice. You see, we have to make a choice. By failing to make a choice to serve God completely, then you have likewise made a choice. Multitudes attempt to go through life without really making a decision. People live for the moment, never deciding about the future. Some of them will even figure that they will deal with the future when the future comes, and so they refuse to even think about the next life. They think they're so confident in their own abilities, their own intellect, and their own strength that they'll make it work and they'll deal with it as it gets here. However, the state of our future existence is determined by the decision we make now. Notice again, Paul has said that now is the accepted time to make that decision. One day the decision will be taken from us, and we then will suffer the consequences of that choice that we have made. And the consequences will last for all eternity, because there is no second chance. You make the choice in this life whether to serve God or not. And once you have made that choice, then the consequences will last for all eternity. You have no chance to change it and change your mind. You see, for centuries, the Jewish people tried to serve both God and idols, but it never worked. Several centuries after both Joshua and Moses, we find that Elijah placed a similar choice before Israel on Mount Carmel. In 1 Kings 18 and verse 21, we find these words, "And Elijah came to all the people and said, How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word." Notice here a great choice again placed before the people of Israel. You have to make a choice. How long will you try to go without making a choice? You have to follow God or you follow Baal. One or the other, but you cannot continue to try to follow both. It just will not work. See, the people of Israel tried to follow both God and Baal. And Elijah was placing an obvious choice before the people. Immediately after this saying, we read of the contest between Elijah and the 400 prophets of Baal. And of course, the result was a clear victory for God. And we would think then that after a clear victory that everybody in Israel would decide to finally serve God, but it really seemed to make little difference in the attitude of the people. They tried to kill Elijah after the contest. Elijah became so discouraged that he went off and hid. He said, "This is it. I quit." Well, I can kind of understand that. I'm sure we would too. But it doesn't matter. You see, the people never really made a choice. Even today, people continue to try to serve God and the world. Matthew 6 and verse 24, we find these words of Christ. He said, "No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Of course, mammon would be another term for money. Basically, God is telling to us that you cannot serve God and money, or you cannot serve God and the things of this world. You cannot have two masters, God says. You have to make a decision here. You must decide, and you need to do it today. Because again, one day, it will be too late. In Jeremiah 8 and verse 20, we find some very sad words. Jeremiah wrote, he said, the harvest is past, the summer have ended, and we are not saved. You see, Jeremiah was talking to the people of his day, and he was telling them that it was too late for them. They should have made the decision to serve God long before, but they never really made the decision. And because they never made the decision, now the decision was being taken away from them. It was too late for them to make that choice. The nation was going to go into captivity, and they were going to suffer the consequences of their failure to make a choice to serve God. You know, the same is true of us. As we said before, one day the decision will be taken from us as well. One day it will be too late for us. Either we'll die, or we'll have a heart so hardened that we will no longer be touched by the gospel of Christ. Either way, one day the choice will be taken before us. We have before us the way of death and the way of salvation. The way of death, of course, is the broad way. And Christ said many are traveling that road, according to Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14. But in contrast to the broad way, there's a narrow way. And he says few are traveling that road. But of course, life comes from traveling the narrow road. But notice Christ says there's only two roads. There's the broad way and the narrow way. And all of us is traveling one of those two roads. If you don't make a choice to serve God, then you're traveling the broad way. In other words, that's emblematic of being the easy way. And certainly many people, maybe even most people, are traveling that way. But we're all traveling one of those roads. Today, then, you need to make a decision about which road you're on. Choose today which road you want to travel. We have to make a choice. If we don't make a choice, then you're traveling the broad way. You're traveling the road that leads to death. You're traveling the road that will lead to eternal punishment. And I know that's not the way that you want to go. That's not the path that we want to follow. Certainly that is not the end result that we want to achieve. If we want to achieve the good road, to be able to enjoy blessings of heaven with God for all eternity, then you need to make the choice today. Decide today to serve God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. You see, that is the only choice that we really want to make. And we have to make that choice. Because if we don't make a choice, then you're traveling the other way. I hope that these words have been encouraging to you and would encourage you to make a decision. If you have never really made a decision, then make a choice today. Make a choice to serve God before it is everlastingly too late. One day, it will be too late. One day, the decision will be taken away from you. And I plead that you will make that choice before it is too late. Thank you for your attention today.